There's have been some reports about Black American men from African American men from the United States going down to Brazil to meet women. Now, if you look at, some people say that these men are going to Brazil because they want to date women of other races. But if you actually look at the statistics and the population composition and the history of Brazil compared with the United States, Brazil actually has more women of African descent than the United States does. It has a larger proportion of women of African descent than the United States does, of people of African descent. So if a Black American goes to Brazil, it would be very easy for them to meet women of African descent, or at least partial African descent. Now, if you look at the transatlantic slave trade to Brazil compared with the transatlantic slave trade to the United States, you can compare the numbers. So the total estimated number of Africans brought to North America, excluding Mexico, during the slave trade was 480,000. Now, if you compare that to the number of Africans brought to Brazil during the transatlantic slave trade, the number brought to Brazil was 3.6 million. Now, if you look at the population of Brazil and the United States today, Brazil has a population of about 176 million, and the United States has a population of around 280 million. So you see, the United States has a larger population, and they brought in fewer Africans. So therefore, you can conclude or assume that the United States has a smaller proportion of people of African descent than Brazil does, and that is the truth. The United States in the United States, people of African descent make up around 12% of the population. In Brazil, people of African descent make up at least about half of the population. Now, there's the United States and Brazil may have some different definitions of what constitutes black. What they call black in Brazil is not necessarily what they call black in the United States. Typically in the United States, they have had a tradition of having what they call one-drop rule, so anybody with any known or discernible Sub-Saharan African descent has traditionally been considered black. So they would classify, they could classify somebody who has blonde hair and blue eyes as being black. Someone with light skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, narrow nose, thin lips, straight hair, they could call that person black in the United States if that person has some known black ancestry. In Brazil, they tend to only call people who are darker skinned or who have less European ancestry. They only call those people black. So in Brazil, black people that they call black may only be 6% of the population. But then, if you include all the people who are mixed, those people make up maybe 40% of the population. And then some of the people who call themselves white in Brazil may also have African ancestry if you did a DNA test. So Brazil has a lot more people with African ancestry than the United States does. So therefore, and even if a person in Brazil who has mixed African and European ancestry is not considered black in Brazil, they could still look the same, have a similar genetic makeup. So let's say somebody has 80% European ancestry and 20% 15% Sub-Saharan African ancestry and 5% Native American ancestry. In Brazil, maybe that person is not considered black, but in the United States, a person with a similar genetic makeup will probably be considered black. Well, what does that mean? That means that if a black person goes to Brazil and meets a woman with that type of ancestry, he can find, so a black American could go to Brazil and find somebody who looks the same as the women who are considered black in the United States. Even if the woman's not considered black in Brazil, they still look the same. So the black men in the United States, they could go to Brazil, find women that look like, maybe they find women that look like Beyonce or Rihanna or Alicia Keys or whatever. Women like that. They could find the women that, the light-skinned type women or the mixed type women, they could find those women in Brazil. And of course, I'm sure they could also find dark-skinned women as well.